may not be as joyful when you go to church if you see a man in a pink dress kissing another man in a pink dress, and they're making out. That'd be a huge sacrifice to even have to go to church if that were the case. And quite frankly, to tolerate that would be a huge sacrifice. Now, one of the things that we see specifically is that churches shouldn't have to make that sacrifice, because what it does is it often will sacrifice the heavenly things for the earthly things. It'll cause people to sacrifice eternity, quite frankly, for the kingdom of this world. And that's not right. And it's a price that is much higher than what the Christian should really be willing to pay. And so in that case, the sacrifice is too much. Now, one of the things that we see specifically is that when the offering plate comes around, if someone were to put in that plate some monopoly money, then obviously, that person wouldn't be looked upon very favorably by the church, because that person isn't making a real sacrifice. That monopoly money just, quite frankly, doesn't pay the bills. And so, if the guy that has to give his 10% has to make a real sacrifice to give his 10%, and it's a continual sacrifice, then it only stands to reason that there should be a continual sacrifice of some sort to cover over some of the wrongdoings that he may find himself in as a result of having to raise that money to give it. For example, when you're out in the world and you're out and about, you may find that, the easiest example to give is that your feet get dirty. That there's moral hazards out there. Not necessarily that you promote sin or that you want to sin or that you're trying to sin, but just quite frankly that you happen to be in a situation where there's a great moral hazard. Like if you're out and about and something happens to happen under your watch, you're the manager or administrator of this big organization, and something happens to happen under your watch where you may not have explicitly intended for that bad thing to happen. Well, that's a moral hazard that people are going to blame you for. And not only will people blame you for it, but quite frankly, you might be at fault even though you didn't intend to be at fault, just because your dominion of power is so big. Because you basically encompass everything from sea to sea, so to speak. If something happens in your land, that means, quite frankly, it could be your fault, depending upon what the circumstance is. And so there has to be a way to atone for that. And quite frankly, if you would say that the sacrifice of Christ once and for all atones for all sins, then and that there's no need for a continual sacrifice of any kind, then it greatly diminishes the ability for sin to be atoned for, because there will be plenty of times where people won't forgive sin and where sin won't be forgiven, and there will have to be something to give up or sacrifice so that things will be made all right. And we see this all the time. We see this with the current legal system of most nations, that when people go to court and they try to get compensation for damages, there's some sort of sacrifice that has to be made by the party that did the wrongdoing. Or there's some sort of sacrifice that has to be made by the people that were wrong. And what's generally the case is that there's a whole system of justice to identify who has to pay that sacrifice. And so this may be, of course, a very plain way of looking at it, less for the sake of soteriology. But the fact of the matter is that when we look at the interaction between God and man, if we were to say specifically that as far as God is concerned, all of the debt for sin for all mankind has been paid in full at the crucifixion of Christ, then we would also have to ask, why is it then that people would continually go to hell? And you could also ask, what about those people that say they're Christians, that believe they're Christians, that believe that they're saved even, that live the most ungodly, unproductive, terrible lives, don't even go to church, and make Christianity look like the worst religion in the world. I mean, what about those people? I mean, if they were to be willing to at least sacrifice their time to go to church, maybe things would be different for them. And if people make sacrifices to educate those people, maybe those people are ungodly and disgustingly sinful, and it's a huge sacrifice for pastor, priest, whatever, to deal with those people, then quite frankly it's a sacrifice. And it would be a sacrifice thus of the entire body of Christ even sometimes to deal with those people. It means it's a sacrifice. And so, quite frankly, Christ may continue to suffer, but not a bloody death on the cross. But he may continue to suffer some sort of sacrifice of something as a result of sin. That he's giving up something as a result of sin, or at least the body of Christ is. And so that's specifically what have to say with the concept of sacrifice.